Socrates said, when put on trial for corrupting the youth of his day in his famous trial for impiety, he supposedly said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And it's to that I want to speak to you off the cuff today, just briefly. What I have discovered in my own life is that when I was a youth, when I was much younger than I am today, without exposing my age, when I was much younger than I am today, there was a lot of ideas that I had that went untested. There were a lot of conclusions that I drew purely by my emotions. And without gaslighting you, I will not mention what those ideas were or even where I am today in this particular video, because I just want you to think about what it means to have strong convictions and to be satisfied in our convictions in a just in a few minutes. So that being said, the it's amazing to me to look back at some of the things that I believed 15, 20 years ago, as opposed to what I believe now, and how so many of those things were based upon purely emotion. And some of those were very, very bad ideas, the ideas that hold no water, that were in some ways totally irrational because I followed my emotions instead of sound reasoning and logic. It is illogical to go through life at all without ever putting some thought behind some of the things that you believe. Say that you know, say that you disagree with a certain president. I just had a conversation the other day, and whether you liked Donald Trump, and I know this, here we go. Like, I didn't want to gaslight you, but here I am. I'm going to gaslight you now. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, and this isn't about Trump. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, what I notice oftentimes is I ask people, and this happened in a conversation just the other day. I ask people, who say something along the lines of, well, he was sexist, he was racist, and that may all very well be. I'm not going to defend his character or his personality. That may very well be. We're just going to assume that maybe he is all those things. But at the end of the day, I asked them, okay, well, what policies did he have that was racist and sexist? And they will say something along the lines of, well, he was a terrible person, he was disrespectful, I'm like, but what about his policies and practice that you can name are racist, sexist, and all these things? And oftentimes they can't name anything. And then in the context of the conversation I was having the other day, it was actually a woman who spoke up and defended Donald Trump, saying, you realize that and I wasn't even aware of this, but she said, you realize that he had more women on his presidential cabinet than any other president in history. I didn't know that. Again, that's not a defense for Donald Trump. It's just a defense of like reasoning through what you believe. I noticed this now. That's in the secular world. Let's move to the sacred world. I noticed that there's a lot of things that go on in a church where people just kind of fall in line with stuff because they're emotionally attached to things, emotionally attached to either experiences, emotionally attached to certain denominational practices, certain liturgical practices. There's just like an emotional attachment to it that we never bring into question, like, why do we practice these things in the first place, and how do we come to the basis of a religious epistemology? There was a famous I would say he wouldn't be considered one of the reformers. He was kind of post-reformer, but he was the father of the Methodist Church. It wasn't really John Wesley that came up with this idea. John Wesley's who I'm speaking of, but his followers that came after him came up just evaluating his works, came up with what they called the Wesley's quadrilateral, which the quadrilateral went like this. It was a way of discovering religious truth that John Wesley would have espoused. They thought it, like, again, this wasn't like Wesley never wrote about, you can't search John Wesley's works and find the Wesleyan quadrilateral or whatever. But this is something that theologians that came after him researched and came up with. And they said this is his basic way of discovering truth from what they can understand. And it started with Scripture being in the highest order. And that probably stemmed from him having a Puritan father, and he had a really high regard on inspiration of Scripture. And then second, if Scripture is silent about something, there would be reason. So your reasoning faculties, your cognitive faculties. And then after that, you have church tradition, and which is like the history of the church itself. And then after that, you would have your personal experiences. And it's not to invalidate personal experience, but that also should be, if you're going to create a train, Scripture should be the engine. The equipping car would be reasoning. The passenger car would be traditions, and then the caboose would be your emotional or personal experiences. And so oftentimes, though, in the postmodern world, we are putting emotions above. In the religious world, Scripture. In the secular world, you would begin obviously with reason. And this is what divides, say a Socrates from from like a Foucault or something like that. Do I think that we're getting smarter? I don't know that the human race is getting smarter. I think that the human race is not progressing in our intellect, especially when I read Socrates, Plato, and some of these people, and even the Apostle Paul. It doesn't seem to me that we're advancing in intellect. It seems that most of our best science, most of our best research goes toward making life more livable, is what we would say. But really, it's making life more convenient. And so we're losing things like hard work, and we're losing things in our culture like growing through difficulties and things like that, because we can, instead of doing the hard work of getting into a book in a library, we can just get on our smartphones and look up stuff, and just Google something or whatever. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody. But I think doing the hard work of reasoning through our convictions, doing the hard work of reasoning through our ideas, and I'm speaking to the secularist, the atheist, the agnostic, the Muslim, and the Christian. Listen, if you're listening, if you've made it this far and you're still listening in, I think we need to do the hard work of reasoning through what we believe. I think we need to do the hard work of reading through the classics and figuring out what the school of thought has thought about this, not just the Western classics, but the Eastern classics as well as every school of thought has thought about these things. If we are holding to a conviction that's so strong that we get into an emotional uproar about it if somebody else believes something different, then perhaps we ought to take 2 steps back and make sure that conviction is valuable enough to cause us to be upset if someone else disagrees with it. And I've noticed that through many, many conversations. It's almost like you just hit a brick wall. It doesn't matter what the thoughts world would be, whether it's in any sort of situation where 2 conflicting ideas arise. Many people hit a brick wall with emotions, and that's sad. And I hear over and over again how people like, I had to write this person out of my life because they have a different opinion than me. And that sort of thing shouldn't exist. That sort of thing should not be that way. And so my exhortation to you is to get into this habit of examining your ideas and make them into what they would call in the philosophy world a justified true belief. In the religious world, a religious conviction, if you will. And let's be sure to remember that it wasn't just Socrates that said the unexamined life is not worth living, but it was also Jesus Christ who put the emphasis on the mind whenever he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so this is something that is, in my perspective, God given. In the secular perspective, it is intrinsic to mortal man. And even um, even there are some well-respected atheistic scientists that would even agree with me on that, that we have the ability to reason, and that distinguishes us from the rest of from the rest of any living creature on this earth. So think about that today. Are you reasoning through what you believe? And I hope that you are, because I agree with Socrates. The unexamined life is truly worth living.